Loads of questions to be answered. Let's welcome in Mo Stewart from the Anfield Wrap. Good to speak to you, Mo. Trent looks like he's off. It's hardly a surprise, but as a Liverpool fan and the Liverpool faithful, how does it feel? You know, boyhood club. He's leaving. He's going to Madrid.
So this is one of those rare situations where it feels a bit like a teaching moment for me and maybe for all of us, because I like to think of myself as a reasonable, logical man. Like, I've done the transition from just a fan into a journalist. I'm now officially an independent journalist. So I'm looking at things a little bit more logically, reasonably.
I like this, Mo.
And yet,
this is needed.
And yet, I was still in October, November time convinced that he would sign a new contract.
Was you?
And yet, I was thinking that this was just a situation where there was just unfortunate timings of Jurgen Klopp leaving and Arne Slot coming in. He wanted to have a look at the new manager, see how things were going. But then you take a step back and you try to be a little bit more logical about it. And you realize that this has actually been in the work for about 4 years, since the last time he signed a contract back in the summer of 2021. He signed a contract for 4 years at that point, when the club were hoping he would sign a contract for 6 years, because he knew that that meant that he would be a free agent at the age of 26. And if he was going to move to one of the big European clubs, they would not be wanting to sign a 28-year-old, but they would want to sign a 26-year-old. So his ambitions were already looking beyond Liverpool Football Club at that point, I believe. And it's kind of understandable if you wind back to where we were in the summer of 2021. By that point, he had won everything there is to win except the FA Cup. Liverpool had just come off the back of an awful season, which they managed to absolutely miraculously save and finish in the third place. But that was the season where it was the COVID season, the real COVID season.
Yeah.
And there were so many home defeats, so much bad play, so much frustration. So you can understand why he would start to think, well, maybe I need to look beyond here. The other thing about that summer of 2021 is that Jurgen Klopp looked like he was beginning to have had enough. Now, it turns out that he was able to get a second wind, but these are all things that would have been going into his mind when he was doing the deal back then. And so if you're already starting to have doubts about whether or not your Liverpool career will remain, whether you will remain a Liverpool player for the rest of your career at that point, when he was 22 signing a new contract, then this really becomes inevitable.
What do you make of the timing of this coming out now? Obviously, Liverpool have recently lost a final. They've been knocked out of the Champions League. They're going to win the Premier League. I think that's pretty clear. You'd find very few people that would argue against that. What have you made of the timing of this kind of coming out today? Do you think it disrupts things at all? Or do you think at some point something was going to have to give and kind of you were going to have to know either way?
Well, I do think there's no good time to give bad news. I think even if it had been announced the day after Liverpool lifted the Premier League title, people would have been upset and angry about it. So you look at it from that perspective. I don't think that this will have any effect on the mood off the back of those last two games for a couple of reasons. One, I think this break will have done us good, Liverpool's good. And the fact that they cut the first game back as the Merseyside derby, that feels like a pretty good refresher for most people who are feeling slightly worried or maybe sorry for themselves about the way the last week of football went for Liverpool. And second of all, and most importantly, he's currently injured. So he's currently not playing. So the likelihood of seeing the scenes that we saw in the home game against Manchester United, where a lot of Liverpool fans turned up adamant that they were going to tell him how they felt about him, and then that was coupled with one of his worst games of the season, which produced a really toxic atmosphere that most people now realise should be avoided at all costs. So I don't think that there'll be any initial issues off the back of the timing of this announcement. I think there's been so long that we've got to this point that most people have kind of made their mind up that this was going to be the eventuality. So there doesn't seem to be any shock.
Not shocked, yeah.
That what we're hearing about today. It's more disappointment, I think.
But on that, Mo, actually, I wanted to ask you about that disappointment. I want to ask you about his legacy. Has Trent's because he's leaving on a free, because he's leaving just as he's stepping into his prime, which you know really clearly laid out for us and really well, that this was meticulous, it was planned. Has his legacy been affected by leaving the club in this way and for the destination that he's going to?
I feel like it could be. I feel like it shouldn't be. But again, this goes back to what I was saying about the emotional side of watching football, and particularly within the fan base, because the idea that we had such a talented footballer, one of the most unique and talented footballers in the world, across the world, who his market value would be astronomical if he was, say, 3 years into with his contract left rather than 3 months of his contract left. And then you think that, well, we're not going to get any money for this player. That's a sign of frustration for sure. For sure it is. I wonder whether or not the idea that you can get some money at all. I know a lot of people saying, well, they should have taken 20 million or whatever derisory offer was on offer in January. But I think back to Michael Owen, Liverpool actually got £8 million for Michael Owen. And trust me, that £8 million did not change anyone's mind about how they felt about Michael Owen.
It's interesting
So,
you say that, Mo, actually, because sorry to cut you off there. We're going to hear from Michael Owen now, actually, who was the last Englishman to make the move from Liverpool to Madrid. And he has told us that nobody can begrudge Trent his move.
There's no doubting that it's an absolutely staggering move. That, you know, what's happening with Liverpool and probably their three best players is completely unprecedented. We were talking earlier on this show, and we were kind of saying that, look, Trent is a phenomenal footballer. Nobody's taking that away from him. But I feel he's more easily replaceable in terms of getting a right back in or building from within with Conor Bradley than it is to replace what Virgil van Dijk brings, or obviously Mo Salah's goals and his productivity. Do you agree with that?
to an extent, yes. I think if Jurgen Klopp was still the manager, I think that would be a harder conversation
Yeah.
because Jurgen Klopp very much had Trent as the center of his world, particularly in terms of creating. Whereas Arne Slot has seen him a little bit more as a part of the whole. So I think you can just tell from where he has been on the pitch. Under Jurgen Klopp, we saw last season he was in central midfield a lot. Sometimes he was in between the two centre halves to try and find some space. It was all geared around giving him the space in which to create and paint those beautiful pictures that he can do with the football. Whereas under Arne Slot, he's very much been in a traditional right back's position. He has been as part of the back line. And interestingly, his numbers in terms of progressive passes and progressive carries haven't actually gone up or down that much. He's been doing a lot more defensive actions under Arne Slot, which is, I think, fascinating because I think that has helped someone like Ibrahima Konate flourish a bit more because he's not having to do the work of two men anymore. So in terms of how easy he is to replace, it depends upon what you want your team to look like. I think Liverpool have got a really interesting decision to make on the other side in terms of the left back. So you could get yourself into a situation where suddenly you're looking for a slightly more progressive style of left back, which means that someone like Bradley will be able to maintain that balance of being someone who can get up and down the pitch, but is not necessarily going to be such a creative force. The problem is, though, Bradley is still very young. I still think he's going to be fantastic and he's going to be the long-term future for Liverpool at that position. But he has picked up quite a few injuries over the course of the season. So I do think that if Trent does leave, and it now looks inevitable, Liverpool will need to buy someone else who can play at that right back position. And then that becomes an interesting point. Do you want someone who's more like Bradley, or do you want someone who offers something a little bit different?
Yeah, completely agree with you on that point. And actually, if you look at the right back that Slot had at Feyenoord, it was a completely different profile to Trent, albeit someone that could do quite a lot of different things from the position. I just wondered, in a parallel universe, if Jurgen Klopp's still the Liverpool manager, do you think it's harder for Trent to leave and say that he's going to depart Liverpool than it is for him to leave Arne Slot behind?
I do. I think if Jurgen Klopp was still the manager and Jurgen Klopp still had the influence that he did have on recruitment, then I think there would have been a lot more pressure on Trent to sign a contract earlier on in the piece than it would have been. Around the time when Jurgen Klopp announced he was leaving was around the time that most of us were expecting to hear an announcement that Trent had signed a new contract. So in that reality, I think in the same way that he did with Jordan Henderson, Jurgen Klopp would have got involved and he would have put the pressure on and helped him to realise that maybe the grass isn't greener on the other side. But again, it's a difficult situation because you can look at the timeline and really see that Trent had made his mind up from a long time ago. And Something else which you need to put into the mix here, which I know that not a lot of people really want to talk about because it feels like a little bit outside of football, but essentially, when deals like this are made, or when you're talking about big numbers, big signing on fees, big commissions, you have to bring into the fact that agents do play a big part of this, and
100%.
agents get their own fees and their own commissions. And who is Trent's agent? It's his brother. So it's a very different situation than having someone who's a business partner, an associate, or your brother.
Yeah.
And you moving could mean a massive windfall for your brother.
For the whole family. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You see it with Marcus Rashford, the same kind of thing of like when family are involved, it just changes the context sometimes and the connotations around it. But I wanted to ask you this actually. With Trent leaving, what do you think it means for the likes of Van Dijk and Salah? Do you think it alters how they feel about it, or do you think they already knew that Trent was leaving? That what they think about doing is what they think about doing. It's not really changed. And what do you think the proposition is like at Liverpool are like as a proposition in general to players that you want to attract this summer?
So I don't think it would have an effect on those two. I don't know them well enough, but I wouldn't have been surprised if there had been conversations amongst the leadership group of the team saying that whatever we want to do or whatever we need to do, we can park it and go out and try and win this league, and then we can deal with it at a later date. So I don't think that there would have been necessarily influenced by him coming or going. I think they have their own reasons for wanting to stay against wanting to leave. And I do think ultimately that it might go down to the wire, but I do think ultimately that the two of them will stay. In terms of Liverpool as an attractive proposition, I don't necessarily think that Trent deciding to leave Liverpool means that Liverpool is suddenly going to become a stepping stone club for everybody. I think Trent's situation is very difficult, very special, because he's been at the club for 20 years. He's won everything there is to win, as I said earlier.
Exactly.
So he would be quite it's understandable for him to start looking beyond the horizons. In terms of players coming in and attracting them, well, I am slightly touching wood here, but it looks like Liverpool are going to be the Premier League champions. And Liverpool did very well in the Champions League until they didn't. So I think if you're a player looking on potentially deciding whether to move to Liverpool or not, I think you can see a lot of good things, a lot of quality things in that area. And I mean, obviously, Liverpool not paying Trent a large amount in wages means that there may be more in the budget for everyone else.
Yeah. Listen, thank you so much for talking to us, Mo. Really insightful stuff. Mo Stewart there from the Anfield Wrap, giving us his thoughts and feelings on the latest news that Trent Alexander-Arnold is looking to move to Real Madrid on a free transfer. You're listening to The Social here on talkSPORT 2.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.